I'm really a guy who lives out in the woods. Don't have any of those special fancy titles. But I am a father, and I want my children to live in a Christian nation. And I want my children to live in a Christian nation.
Welcome back to The Lone Bulwark. I'm Stephen Wolf. Today, I'm going to talk about the CN Study Committee by the PCA. Now, the document has not been published. I've heard that there's a document going around, but I haven't seen it. But I want to talk about it a little bit, what I expect from it, and some of the things that they're obviously going to try to deal with, and also some of the problems they're going to face. I don't think this is an easy study committee. In some ways, this is probably a more difficult study committee, or at least a topic, than the same-sex attraction study thing that came out a few years ago with Kevin DeYoung and Tim Keller. So I think this one is going to be a bit more difficult for them to manage, especially in terms of expectations. So let's talk about this thing. So again, last year, June 25, they voted for this. The majority of the pastors or the officers there voted in favor of this thing. It was, I believe, as I recall, it was a compilation of 3 overtures delivered by different presbyteries. Maybe it was 2 and 1 was dropped. I can't remember all of it, but they were combined into one. And I guess the one they approved is the one with the best language or something like that. This is kind of wild to think about. When the book came out in late 2025, I was expecting the book would kind of make a splash. 1, because of the title, 2, because Canon Press published it, 3, because the content would offend all sorts of people, and I thought for maybe several months it would just have its day in the limelight, and then it would kind of go away, and people would bring it up here and there, and that's kind of what people expect from the sort of book they think is going to have a short-term impact. You fast forward 3 years later, and now the PCA is doing a study committee, and one of the OPC presbyteries, I believe it's somewhere in the Southwest, perhaps in Texas, they're going to submit an overture for the OPC General Assembly to see if they are going to do a study committee on Christian nationalism. Now, what they might do is simply say, look, the PCA's is good enough, and we'll just adopt that. I don't know. I don't know how all those things work. I try not to get too much into denominational politics because I find it rather boring. But anyway, I don't know what the OPC is going to do, but that would be great if they did a study committee as well and see what they can put forward. So some people on the committee, I know James Wood, or is it James Woods? I can never get it straight. James Wood, I'll say that. He's on there. He's a young guy, young theologian. And I think he affirms the idea that the state can promote Christianity. So that's interesting. An advisor to it is Scott Swain. So Scott Swain's it. I think he also affirms that. And I think this speaks to one of the difficulties that the committee is going to face. I don't know much about the other people on the committee, but I expect that there's probably a variety of views on what the state can in principle do on the committee. And so what they could do is they could do a majority report and then a minority report. So you'd have disagreement on the own committee. Now, that's never ideal, so I don't expect that actually to happen. I expect that there's going to be a unified committee, and they're going to say, look, you can hold all these views. You can be an establishmentarian. You can be against establishment. Maybe you can punish blasphemy, all these things. I think it's going to affirm the wide range of things. And part of it is not only the composition of the committee. I think that they're not going to have a great interest in establishing the PCA as affirming a fully substantive difference with the tradition. Because it's very clear, not just from the 16th and 17th centuries, and not only add to that the 18th century, but even 19th century Presbyterians, American Presbyterians would all affirm the principle, not all, but most of them, the vast majority would affirm that government, or at least the nation itself, ought to promote true religion. Now, many of them in the 19th century would disagree on, the species of act. Remember in my previous episode, I talked about genus and species and individual acts. They'll all affirm, for the most part, the genus of act, which would be promoting to religion, but then they might disagree on the species, which would be establishment. So some might say establishment, you shouldn't do establishment. Now, even among those, there'd be differences. Some would say in principle it's wrong, and others would just say, look, prudentially, what tends to happen is the church becomes corrupted by the state. So this is not a prudential thing. It's permissible in theory. It's not immoral in itself, but in practice, it's bad. So there's just a wide variety of those sorts of views at the level of species. So they might be anti-establishmentarian, but still affirm the government in some sense ought to promote true religion, right? That would be, many of the founders would affirm that. Many of the founders, of course, were supported establishment as well. But anyway, so you'd have to deal with the fact that if you're going to take a hardline secularist view of church and state, by secularist, I simply mean that the state in principle has no cognizance of true religion. That is, they're within their political reasoning, that is, as public officials, say in crafting laws or whatever it is, they can't include true religion or even natural religion in making laws. That would be full-on secularism. People like Scott Clark affirm that. Van Drunen affirms that. What's his name? Michael Horton affirms that. And all those people in Westminster West, and I think other people affirm that as well, but they're just less consistent and systematic in the way they think about things. If the committee goes full-on secularist, then that establishes the PCA as in substantive disagreement with practically the entire Reformed tradition prior to the 20th century. Now, they can do that. They can do that if they want, but I doubt they're going to do that. So I think they're going to say you can be a secularist, you can be establishmentarian, maybe you can suppress blasphemy, you can believe in Christian nations, Christian laws, Sabbath laws, you can believe all that stuff. So it's going to be very, very extensive like that. Now, you might think, oh, great. So now the PCA is allowing you to be, a Christian nationalist perhaps in some sense, or it's allowing you to be establishmentarian. Great, check the box. Great, I'm in. I think, again, that's what they're going to do. But that's a matter of principle. So this is what we have to understand. When people receive this report, what I expect, again, the extensive permissibility of different understandings of political theory, political theology, you can be postmillennial, all this stuff. They're going to say that. So they're going to be strong in principle. That is, you can hold the strong principled view, but what I expect, though, is that they're going to undercut the means. And a lot of people are already like this. Most people who claim that their theology is establishmentarian, which is just obnoxious, to be honest. Not that I'm against establishmentarian, but like, I'm for establishment. That's like all of their political theology. It's kind of silly. But anyway, these people already have a weak perspective of politics on the ground. So you have your principle, which is promoting true religion. For a lot of these people, the end of it is church establishment, but the means to it is simply revivalism. So the means to it is that they don't actually want to do politics on the ground. They don't want to do things that would offend a large portion of the country. They don't want to offend the liberal elite, at least not too much. They don't want to look to them. They don't want them to see Christianity as a power hungry, this and that. They don't want to offend the Hindus. They don't want to offend the Muslims. They don't want to offend the Jews. So what they're going to do is they're going to use language of, don't lord it over like the Gentiles. They're going to say, Christ's kingdom is not of this world. They're going to use language like this world is not our home, that we should be winsome. I don't know if they'll use that word, but they're going to use the sort of language that undercuts the means, which in the end means that if you believe in establishmentarianism or Christian nations or whatever, what you ultimately must also believe is that these things just happen organically from a converted, revived society. So once you have 95% of the people going to church, effectively, when these laws are unnecessary, this is how James White and other people talk as well. Effectively, when these laws are unnecessary because everyone is already doing these things, then you can come in, then you can have the Christian nation, the Christian laws, the Sabbath, the blue laws, the blasphemy, you can have all that. So you undercut the means. I would say that in general, not everyone, but a lot of the post-mill crowd think like this. A lot of people who are positive ah-mill people think like this. A lot of people who are just evangelical and conservatives think like this. This is the common idea that, yes, they really intensely care about politics, but in the end, they're not going to do the politics. They're going to listen to and talk radio. They're going to watch the news. They're going to say they want this and that, but they're not actually going to do it. Why? Because they're not interested in the means. Things are just going to happen as we talk about it. Do another podcast about the glories of establishmentarianism, and that's contributing to, I don't know, that's contributing to it actually happening in the world. So they're going to undercut the means. So we can't get sort of tricked into thinking that it's actually moved the sort of ball forward by saying that they're allowing you to be establishmentarian. There's already plenty of people in the PCA who are establishmentarian. They're going to undercut the means. In the end, politics, especially politics in call it a democracy or republic or whatever you want to call the American government or political system, in the end, you have to actually do the politics. You can't just talk about it. You can't just have a talk show. Sometimes these talk show guys, I wonder how they've done it for decades and like haven't really made a significant impact. But anyway, you actually have to do the thing on the ground, which is much different than theory. It's much different than the theology. It's much different than talk. It actually involves all sorts of networking and action and frankly, making people upset. So if they undercut the means, then the principle and the ends are useless. Now, a good principle of logic is that for any means that are granted, any ends that are granted, there are sufficient means. So if God establishes government to, let's say, one principle of government is the promotion of true religion, then God has also supplied the means sufficient to that end. That is, whenever we have this concern about moralizing and concern about power and concern about how we're going to offend this and that person or this group or this special interest or whatever, God has already established the ends, and therefore, by logical extension, we have the means. Now, that doesn't mean that any means is going to attain the end. It just means that in any sort of situation, there are means available by which you can affirm the principle. Okay, so in our context now, in certain places, they could establish Sabbath laws. In certain states, they could establish blasphemy laws. I know the Constitution, all that, but they can do that with support of the people. They don't do it. Those are means to the end they're not actually using. Things are available to different governing authorities in different places. But anyway, the means are there for the ends, but I think they're going to undercut the means, as I've already said. I think the other thing too that they're going to do is I think that the principal purpose of the report is actually not the politics, because they're going to say you can affirm all these things. Of course, they're undercut the means, but the central purpose is to say, look, we're not anti-Semitic and we're not racist, and we denounce all those people who are. And in putting that in the report, they're just reiterating things that they've already said many, many times in the PCA. So in fact, they did it last time. They did it last time as well. They're going to condemn that. They're going to attach these things to Christian nationalism. They're going to try to poison the well on anyone who would be a Christian nationalist. That's tricky in itself, because a lot of people who agree with much of my political theory don't call themselves Christian nationalists. They might now call it the new Christian right or whatever label they're going to throw out there. They're going to try to extend that out and in some way poison the anyone who's Christian nationalist. Now, I know people want to know what in essence to their mind is Christian nationalism, apart from the racist anti-Semitic stuff. What is it fundamentally? Fundamentally, they think Christian nationalism is using the levers of power that God has created to push a Christian public order.
I've been having a problem with my friend Ben.
That's raw Ben Nationalist to you.
I'm sorry, my friend Raw Ben Nationalist. See, he doesn't trust those big box soap companies with all their nasty chemicals.
That's right. Gotta keep my T levels high.
Right, which has led him to do things like not shower for days at a time. But luckily, I just got some of that new Indigo Sundry soap.
Ew, keep that away from me.
No, Ben, this soap is different. It's made from all natural ingredients and none of that nasty, harmful stuff. And so now my friend Rob Ben Nationalist here.
That's Mr. Sir Reginald Ben Esquire III. Thank you very much.
So now Mr. whatever his name is can shower in confidence. And so can you if you head to indigosundrysoap.com and pick yours up today. And hey, if you subscribe to any of their bundles or soaps, you get an automatic 10% off all your orders.
Delightful.
Okay.
This is Dave. Dave is dead. When he wasn't, he was a successful businessman with a rather large estate. This is Ben. As Dave's son, Ben has just inherited a logistical nightmare. Dave wasn't exactly organized with his estate. Sorting through folders, receipts, and records, a hunting lodge in Montana, a 401k, lots of investments, several bank accounts, and of course, taxes. Ben was overwhelmed. Enter Joe Garcia, Backwards Planning Financial. When Ben called Joe and explained everything, Joe replied,
"No problem. That's easy."
And somehow it was. With Joe's guidance, Ben was able to put a robust financial plan in place which helped mitigate risk and bring order to the chaos, while building wealth, organizing his estate, easing the tax burdens, and cutting unnecessary costs. He helped Ben do something Dave never did: plan ahead. Starting at the end and working backwards, Ben now has a plan for his own family. Now his kids won't go through what he did when he eventually... Backwards Planning Financial. Start planning for your death before you're gone.
That's what they think Christian nationalism is. So you can affirm establishment and not be a Christian nationalist because fundamentally your means are just revivalist. Your only political means, which are not political, would be gospel proclamation. That's it. If you affirm establishment and revivalism, you are good. You're in. So what the report's going to do is it's going to dance around the question of power, pursuit of power, and ensure that we don't have the means to the end. I already talked about that, but in the other sense, in the anti-Semitic stuff, anti-Semitism, which I know James Wood is really excited about condemning that, and the racist stuff, they're going to condemn that very clearly. But the problem is, I don't think it's going to have the effect that they think it has. I mean, take like someone like Tucker Carlson. You talk to him about Israel, and he denies for every minute he talks negative about Israel, he'll deny 3 times that he's anti-Semitic. So if you establish this committee and you say anti-Semitism bad, and all these like future officers and future members, you have to ask them about that, and they deny that they're anti-Semitic, they can still affirm everything that Tucker Carlson says about Israel and the Jewish lobby and AIPAC and say they're not anti-Semitic. The same thing with race. Racism is so poorly defined or non-defined in principle. They do that intentionally. That you could say, I'm not racist, but still believe in differences of IQ, differences of potential, all sorts of things, and say you're not racist because you actually don't hate anyone. So I don't think they can actually go far enough, because in one sense, they don't want to get into the question of, are they going to address whether Israel is our top ally? Are they going to put that in the report? I don't think so. They're not going to go all the way to that. They're just going to start doing their, renunciations or denouncements of this and that, which everyone can just do and still affirm all these positions. Like if you have these various questions or these opinions to say Tucker Carlson, you just say, yeah, I agree that I'm not anti-Semitic. So anyway, I don't think they're actually going to achieve anything on that front. So the fundamental thing they're going to try to achieve is to make sure that you don't put faith in politics, that you don't think that there is a possibility for this to be a Christian nation. So take like a Kevin DeYoung line that they're always just talking about the impossible. Okay. That first of all, that's a distortion of our actual position because we are prudential. But anyway, it's just going to be, it's impossible. It's not going to happen. It's just a dream. We're arguing about nothing. It's all theory. That's what's going to be. You can believe in theory, but you must wait on revivalism. So anyway, that's what I think the committee is going to do. Again, it's going to have a broad, extensive affirmation of various positions. So in principle, you could be an extremist, But in means, you have to be just a good old grill Republican. In the end, you just want to grill and watch the game. And when you show up on Sunday, you don't care what Trump did or this guy did. You only care about what happened in the game. What happened in the game last night? Oh, the game. Yeah, that's really important. Let's argue about whether or not two quarterbacks are better than each other. Oh, this guy's my guy. My team, is better than your team. It's all so stupid. But anyway, I guess I'm taking the Torbo line when it comes to sports. But that's what they would prefer. You can be really sort of establishment, yeah. But yeah, you know what? That game is on that night. I can't go to that GOP event. My team's playing. You know, that really big event thing, like we might be going to war with Iran, but you know what? I'd rather talk about how that quarterback tripped or that referee made a bad call. You know, that's just more important, right? I don't want to be consumed by politics. I don't want to be consumed with something as trivial as politics and distract me from the gospel and heaven as my final dwelling place. There's no home down on earth. But you know what? That team, I got fired up. I had a lot of nachos and drank, a couple beers. And I really enjoyed that game, and I want to argue with it with some other guy who cares a lot about some other team with different colors. Very great. Anyway, I don't know how I got on that, but that's all the stuff I expect. All right, so now let's talk about, there's an article here. There it is. This is by Philip Bunn. This is from a long time ago, but you know what? It's actually Philip Bunn. I don't think he likes me, but he does in this little article on Providence. Providence guys don't like me either. They say all sorts of nasty things about me that aren't true. But he gives a fairly good introduction into what's happening. And he says here, the question is whether WCF is Christian nationalist and whether ethno-nationalism. Whether it's connected with ethno-nationalism. So the big question is the PCA going to condemn Japan and Israel? I'm really waiting for them to say that ethno-nationalism is wrong. Or what they're going to do is they're going to conflate nature and grace, spiritual and natural. That's what they do. Whenever you want modern egalitarian social arrangements, what do? I'm two kingdoms. Oh, but by the way, grace makes us actually eliminates all that stuff. Yeah. Oh, we have to separate nature and grace and all this and that. Oh, but you know what? Except for that one point. Yeah. And that one point, that's an exception though. We have to actually unify, and we're all spiritual and Christians. That's our only kind of nation. It relativizes. Grace relativizes. It only relativizes that. Don't let grace do anything else except for reform hearts. It doesn't transform socialism, except it does transform the ethnic composition of a nation. And we ought to support multiculturalism. They don't say that word, but we ought to support pluralism because that's the gospel. But wait, two kingdoms theology. No, we have to separate this and that. We don't want Christian nationalism. It's all so stupid. But anyway, let's follow the principles. Well, guys, can we do that? Comfortable bedfellows have caused confusion, division, dissension among the congregates of PCA churches and officers. This is always kind of a funny line to me because Presbyterian churches are always in some sort of dissension or division over something. I mean, right now they're fighting over, female deacons. And, it's like they're fighting over this stuff. Oh, but is anyone bringing up that, you're bringing up confusion and division and dissension? Basically, we as Christian nationalists or the New Christian Right or classical Protestants are trying to assert the majority position of their tradition. And then this is being labeled as division and dissension. Because they are committed to post-Warren Court church-state relationships. And we're saying, those aren't good, violates the tradition, also kind of dumb in terms of theory and theology. We're the ones causing the division and dissension. I just don't frankly want to agree with that. But this is a tool. It's the same thing with peace and purity of the church. It's like, you hold a certain position and then the loudest person, often a lady, gets the most offended by it, doesn't want to confront you personally, goes through the session, and the session is like, well, I guess I gotta be the middleman between this dude and her. And so who's actually disrupting the peace and purity of the church? It turns out it's the guy saying something that's historical and well established. But anyway, things like that happen. Committee is just asked to study the relationship between Christian nationalism and unreal teaching. Again, ethno-nationalism, very good. I just don't think, frankly, none of these guys are equipped to deal with these questions, because what they're going to want to do is they want to use the theology to attack the ethnos part, while also affirming distinctions that don't allow them to do that. And even Van Drunen recognized this, by the way. Van Drunen himself, in his, his like Living the Two Kingdoms, was it Living in God's Two Kingdoms? Even in that he says that grace does not eliminate ethnic difference. So these guys who want to make these fine theological distinctions, who will write systematic theologies that distinguish this and that, and we have to be systematic, and we're good Presbyterians, which means we write tedious theology. When they get into politics, it's like, well, we can grab from this and we can grab from that, and then we denounce ethno-nationalism. That's what they do. Everyone does it. Even a lot of guys, even in the Davin Institute world, do this. Like they know. I believe that they know that they're actually making stuff up. But anyway, people do this. Theology has to be precise, and if you're not precise on something like the Trinity, then you're a heretic. In politics, you can do everything ad hoc. Every sort of thing you can pull from can be thrown in there, so you can get your own particular arrangements. Theology and politics is conflated. Ethics and politics, ethics and theology are conflated. Ethics and politics are conflated. Did I say all those things? Anyway, so over and over and over, it gets kind of frustrating. So let's just try to be as systematic in our politics as we are in our theology. Maybe we ought to do that and not start, ad hocly adding or introducing theological concepts into our politics that actually violate our own principles. Let's not do that. I'm two kingdoms. Yeah, it's a common kingdom of nature, but we got to bring this in here. Yeah, we want to be good moderns and multiculturalists and principled pluralists. And so let's just, okay, I'll stop doing that. Nationalism more generally, you really think, project of ressourcement. So I appreciate Phil Bunn for bringing this up, that, people are doing ressourcement. Ressourcement has been happening in theology for a long time, and now it's happening in politics. We're bringing politics back. And if you read a lot of the older people who are doing politics, by the way, it's far superior to any nonsense written by people like Dan Darling and those guys. Imago Dei. Like it's so much better than anything being written nowadays. Read the old stuff in politics. Read Keckerman, Dano, read Althusius, read Gillespie, read Rutherford. It's so much better. They actually know how to compose an argument and demonstrate their conclusion. Even if you don't agree, you'll be a better thinker after reading these guys. You read the modern people, and it's like, it turns out that the Imago Dei means we have to have multiculturalism. I mean, it's just so dumb. Like every book by Dan Darling, I don't read them. Okay, I've read one. I read his book on Imago Dei, which is atrocious. But everything is like this like splattering of incoherent, unsystematic ideas, all ad hoc, all worthless. And in the end, it just ticks all the boxes off of every sort of modern Christian, and they think it's brilliant when it's actually just really, really bad. Are there older, better ways of thinking? Okay, what are the newer ways of thinking? Pluralism? Okay, great. Okay, then he brings up and calls my book a landmark case. He's a political theorist by training. And he brings up my principle of similarity, which I appreciate that. Principle of similarity. I think this is a principle of social life, and then it makes its way into political life, because after all, the purpose of politics is that we would have a good social life in the end. That is not social life as I can go see friends on the weekends, but a social life as a community, as a people. We're social beings. Principle of similarity means that in general, you are going to, the flourishing of a community is conditioned. One condition of that is that you would be sufficiently similar in ways of life, in your way of life. Because ways of life include common cultural expectations. They include mutual understanding of what you ought to do in certain places. It has mutual objects of respect. It has mutual courtesies, all sorts of things. I mean, let alone like common language, civic events, common history. All those things mean that you and that other person are linked together in your second nature, in your cultural nature, to a way of being in the world that makes you, in a way, like cousins. You're not literally cousins, but it makes you, in a way, like cousins that you can then get on in the world. You can actually work with people. You can go down the street and have mutual understanding. You can communicate effectively. All sorts of things. You can go sacrifice. You can join a military and die for that country. You're dying for your people. Now, if someone were to deny all that is actually not a principle of social life, I don't even know what to do with that. Like, if you're going to deny principle of similarity, then that means if each person in your community spoke a different language, you think that would work? I'm saying if you deny the principle outright, then you're basically saying that mere humanity with no other second nature connection is sufficient for a social life. I think almost everyone in history would say you're completely absurd. Even people say like, oh, well, in my church we can get along. Okay, first of all, that's a church that is oriented towards eternal life, heavenly life, word and sacrament. And by the way, you're learning the word in the vernacular. So you already have a principle of similarity that is a particular thing. So you're already, to one degree, a certain degree, affirming the principle of similarity, but that doesn't really matter because in the end, it's a church. It's not one of fire departments, militaries, laws, customs, traditions, history, sacred spaces. That's completely different than a church context. So you can say, my people are people of the church. Like, okay, when you leave the church and you go to the grocery store and you get a nice pleasantry from a woman you've never seen before, and she says, how are you doing? Oh, yeah, and everyone knows what to do and everyone waits in line and everyone can be friendly to each other. Well, that's not the church. And yet in that environment in which people kind of have a general expectation of what you're supposed to do, you actually are able to achieve the task you went there for because of certain agreed to terms in that space. And you just take that broader out into society, all different places. That's how a people work and fit together in their totality as a nation. So yeah, that's the principle of similarity. And by the way, it makes, but again, this is what people do. They will take that and they'll say, my people are the church, which again is grace coming to destroy nature. You're saying you don't have a country that that you would die for? I mean, we praise people who join the military. We'll go to their military funeral. We'll say they served and died for their country. And yet, no, they didn't die for my people. They died for someone else's people. My people are in the church. It's absolutely absurd. It's never held consistently unless you're an Anabaptist. And even then, they don't hold it consistently. Or they say, look, the gospel destroys that. And so we as Christians have to be in the church and we're outposts of the kingdom of heaven. So we leave the church. And then when we're outside in our nation, our politics needs to be heavenly politics. And in heaven, it's a multicultural paradise. And so our politics should be oriented towards making the earth a heavenly paradise of multiculturalism. No, we don't want to bring heaven down to earth, except we want to pull down the multiculturalism, but not the other stuff, like the stuff about everyone's a Christian, the stuff about God reigns directly, immediately. We don't want any of that stuff. What we do want is just that one part of the multiculturalism. We'll pull that down, and that's our heavenly politics, right? So that's what we're going to do. Again, grossly inconsistent, violates all the other principles that they affirm. It violates the very things that they accuse, or it fits the things that they accuse me of, which is silly, that I want to pull heaven down to earth, that I want to make the state into a church or whatever, that I want to bring the kingdom of God in by force, like all these things. You want to subject your neighbor to multiculturalism because you think it is your heavenly Christian political obligation to do so, but only in that one particular point. Well, congratulations, you are inconsistent and incoherent, but it sounds good. It sounds good in the end, right? That's a principal similarity. To be clear, is not the only representative. The case for Christian nationalism is nothing more or less than historic reform position on the magistrate. So he's not saying that. He's saying that I claim that. Yes, I have claimed that. If the historic claim is government ought to promote true religion, then that is the solid principle of the Reformed tradition before the 20th century and well into the 20th century. In fact, I'd say World War II kind of messed this up. When you think secularism is normal, that's because you were socialized into secularism. And if you were socialized into any other period in American history, you would not be a secularist in that sense. You might believe that the government generally should stay away from the church, but you'd still believe most likely that this nation is Christian nation and that the laws should to some degree reflect that. There ought to be some kind of promotion of Christianity. That's even in the American context, let alone all the other centuries and all the other places in Protestant history or Reformed Protestant history would affirm that principle as well. Okay. And again, the guys in the 19th century who denied establishment denied it because for prudential reasons, because they thought, given the experience over, many centuries, that it eventually actually corrupts the church. Okay. That's a position. I actually don't particularly agree with that, though of course it's a potential, but I don't think it's a necessary thing that will happen no matter what. But but I do claim, that most of what I say is the historic position on the magistrate. Again, you can look at the book and things that I say that the government can or may do this, may do this, may do this. That doesn't mean they must do these things, but it's morally permissible that yes, you can punish heretics. Yes, it's morally permissible in the abstract that you can suppress blasphemy, that you can have a church establishment, that you can reform and correct the church via law or via the civil action. All that stuff is a may, not a must. It would be appropriate in certain contexts. I've talked about this before, so I'll leave it there. But yeah, I do think it is the historic reform position on the civil magistrate. But this is where, again, the committee is in a bind because they know that. And some of the people on the committee actually affirm that. Others don't probably want to affirm that. And so to bring it all together, they'll say, you can be a Van Drunen secularist. You can be some sort of neo-Kuyperian. I don't know if you can be a original Kuyperian, but anyway, you don't want to be any sort of Kuyperian, to be frank. Don't just get rid of that. But, you can be all that stuff and be permissible, of course, as long as you undercut the means. All right, so there's three claims. The first is that the view advanced by Christians is a historic view. That's obviously the case. It is a view drawn, for example, of history. The second claim is that Christianity is not a historic ground, but also represents the consensus of Reformed Protestantism. Now, if you're going to say Christian nationalism represents a consensus within Reformed Protestantism, it of course depends on what this nationalism, this Christian nationalism is. I've said before that, 95% or a high percentage of what I believe is actually just classical Protestantism. It's classical Protestant politics. There's the other stuff in there where I talk about nation that you won't find all these examples of it within the tradition because I think it's just kind of assumed. You'll still see in the 19th century, for example, American Presbyterians talk about how they don't like all these foreigners coming in because it's undermining the Sabbath. You'll see that all over the place. But before that, people wouldn't talk about it as much because there wasn't mass migration. There wasn't this mass movement of peoples. For the most part, that 95% of the people in a town had ancestors who were born and lived in that town forever. So that issue didn't come up. When it did come up, it came up because of Protestant refugees. There were a lot of problems in many different cities with Protestant refugees, sometimes because they competed with trades, sometimes because they had certain forms of worship that they wanted to do that the city didn't like, all sorts of things and problems They often were not granted citizenship because their politics were not trusted. They thought, by the way, that they would install their own people into the town council or whatever political system they had. And so they were not granted citizenship as a political matter because they didn't want foreigners. So there was that there, but it's not as extensive in the writings as you might like. But still, there are clear indicators that they affirm that you ought to love the place that you live, that in some sense you're connected to the soil, that in ways you're connected to the people, you're most bound to the people in which you were born, people who are closest to you, people who are similar to you. All those things are represented. So if you want to take all that, I would say Christian nationalism, as I present it in terms of the principles and the substance of it, yeah, that is the historic consensus view within Reformed Presbyterianism, minus whatever you see in the late 20th century, okay? And minus like maybe certain theonomic views. I think postmillennialism is pretty well established in certain Puritans. So I don't think that's eschatology is probably not as big of a deal. That is, it is not merely one of many styles of camps, but it represents the majority overwhelming consensus view. Yeah, I would affirm that. Yeah. Third claim that it should be embraced by Christians is theologically sound, politically prudent, will require much more discernment to adjudicate. Okay, politically prudent and theologically sound. Okay, so this would be, so you got the historic and then you got the consensus, and now you have to say whether it's theologically sound. Now, and we'll get to the prudent part. If it's theologically sound, if it's unsound, that is, if the principle of promoting true religion is unsound, that means you have to adopt Vandrunian, modern two kingdom secularism, right? Yeah, I mean, I make certain theological claims and assumptions within the book, and so I guess they could do that. But really, if they're going to question the theology side of my book, then, it's pretty easy to demonstrate that then they're questioning the soundness of the theology of their own tradition. Okay, I would actually say that the government promoting to religion is not actually a theological principle, it's a political principle. It exists within the domain of politics or the discipline of politics. But I don't know if Phil Bunn's saying that, that's probably, whatever he's saying. So I would say that theology is separate from that. It's actually a form of theology being antecedent to politics, being in politics as a principle of its operation and one of its ends. But anyway, we won't get into that right now. So again, I generally think that if they're going to question the soundness of my theology, then they have to, by extension, question the soundness of most people in the Reformed tradition. Now, is it politically prudent? Okay. Political prudence means that it means that you have to decide upon the means to a fixed end. So if the end is we want, let's say, virtuous and pious citizenry, in our particular situation, we would have to choose the appropriate political means to that end. Okay, we'd have to choose the appropriate political means to that end that's available for us. Now, in our situation, that would be different than 100 years ago or 200 or whatever. In a different place, it would be different what the actual action would be. So whether you think adopting certain means is prudent is a very good question. And that's a very difficult question. The problem with this, however, is that Christian nationalism, as I present it, and even as, for the most part, as Doug Wilson and others present it, is a set of universal fixed principles and ends. So prudence has nothing to do with it. If I'm saying government ought to promote true religion, that is a fixed principle of government. It's inherent, intrinsic to the very thing of politics. And the end of it is a pious citizenry, or virtuous, however you want to frame the end, but you can get that in different ways. But if those are fixed, then prudence has nothing to do with it. That's necessary. It has not entered into the realm of contingency because it's a principle and it's an end. So again, prudence is a different question. In fact, I would say that when you do Christian political theory, you are delineating the principles and the ends, and then certain ways to talk about the means, but the means themselves is actually not a political theorist's job, nor a theologian's job. The means is the job of the civil ruler. He is the one who's charged to be politically prudent. I mean, now as citizens in a democracy, we are in a way too. But principally, the one who by God is charged to be prudent is the civil magistrate, not the theologian, not the political theorist, not anyone except the civil rulers. All right. Now, you as a citizen can decide whether it's prudent to adopt the label if you want. If that's a realm of prudence, fine. Yeah, I agree with that. Some people who agree with me don't take the label. I'm totally cool with that. However, anyway, I keep going on. Is that okay? Engage in some sort of rule, contemporary thinkers have available options. They could, like David Van Drunen, suggest that the principles and framework established 1600 thinkers is broadly correct and useful, establish difference between what is common and what is sacred, leaving the sacred to the church and common to the magistrate. Well, first of all, this is just a confusion. Yes, I haven't seen the reformers or anyone in the tradition prior to 20th century talk about a common kingdom. I could be wrong about that. But there is a sense of commonness. You have the idea of a common notion. Common notions are things that are in the natural law or part of the law of nations that are common that all nations ought to have. And then you relegate the sacred to, the purely sacred to the things of the church. That's actually basic Reformed two-kingdom theology. The problem with Van Drunen's argument is he fails to see that one principle of what's common is that government ought to promote true religion. So if government ought to promote true religion is a common notion for political reasoning, and Christianity is a true religion, well, then government ought to promote Christianity. So what's essentially happened is Van Drunen has taken the two kingdom or the twofold kingdom distinctions or the various distinctions within Reformed political thought and presented them, and then just eliminated God from being intrinsic to political reasoning. In other words, he simply removes the principles of the true God within politics. That's his move. And I think he does it without any sort of principle, and I think his argument doesn't work, of course. But anyway, I don't think someone by adopting common versus sacred is not taking an innovative approach in itself, because public religion is common. Promoting true religion is common. Just like promoting justice is common. Of course, different countries are going to promote it poorly or better, in the same sense that they're going to promote true religion poorly or better, right? It's the same thing. And so the distinction between common or redemptive, all that stuff is just a complete misunderstanding of the Reformed tradition of the twofold kingdom. At the same time, they could suggest that these thinkers are merely mistaken when they treat, for example, blasphemy laws with the power of purview civil magistrate. Okay, I guess you could say that. I mean, then you'd be going against even your own guy, John Locke, who said that actually denying that there's a God would be detrimental. I mean, this actually denies like a fundamental principle of all of Western thought until very recently. I mean, even Plato is talking about killing the atheists, in his laws. I mean, the whole idea is that if you don't have any sort of public recognition of God, then you can't have virtue. If you can't have virtue, you can't have a civil life. You can't have a civil society. Retrieval of this kind says that these thinkers are broadly correct in principle, incorrect in their application, and can thus be adopted with modifications. No, this is actually something that two kingdom people say, and it's very frustrating. They have modified the principles, right? Again, promoting true religion is a common notion. That is a principle of political reasoning, you could say political reasoning. Yeah, it's a principle. It's not an application. Application is in the realm of prudence. Principle is at the realm of genus. Application is in the realm of species. The principle is necessary. The species or the application in the act of promoting true religion is in a realm of contingency, which means it would be different in different places. Some things you could do effectively, some things you could not, depending on the circumstances. Okay, so actually they are modifying, Van Drunen, Horton, Clark, all those guys are modifying at the level of principle. They're just using this sort of language and schema of common and redemptive or secular and sacred to then say they're being historic when they are modifying it substantively. They're modifying it in principle. In fact, all they're doing really is just removing the principle. They're effectively making God wholly extrinsic to political life. I mean, extrinsic, that he's still the efficient cause of politics for them, but in terms of being an intrinsic principle of political reasoning, that has been actually removed entirely. And that's why you get, in the end, you get secularism. That's why you get, in the end, no cognizance of true religion or even natural religion. One could alternatively suggest that the entire category of social and political doctrines is more context dependent. And then here's John Ehret's thing. Here's what John Ehret says. With this distinction of view, it makes sense to treat the retrieval of theology proper differently than the retrieval of certain social and political doctrines. Reformation era claims about social and political order are in general more likely to be contingent and time-bound, while the former are not. Now, this is, again, another confusion. John Ehret, nice guy, but he's wrong about this. In the Reformation era, they were asserting political principles as fixed and universal. And the contingency element, as I said earlier, contingency is a realm of the means. It's a realm of the species of act, not the genus. So the Reformation era guys are arguing for a principle of promoting true religion. Now, it just happens in 16th century Geneva that you could do that pretty extensively and get away with it. It turns out that in 17th century New England, you can do that pretty extensively, not as much, but pretty close, and get away with it for until the 1690s. But then when it comes to late 18th century, you can't do that. Because in the realm of contingency, through various reasons that I've talked about before, certain things would not be suitable and appropriate because those enter into the realm of contingency. But throughout that entire time, from the Reformation in the 1520s, all the way up until late 19th century, early 20th century, the principle that government ought to promote true religion was considered a fixed, timeless, universal principle that then was applied in a realm of contingency, which means it would change in different places. So John Ehret is just wrong here. No one in the Reformed tradition, certainly in the era he's talking about, would recognize the idea that their political principles are somehow contingent or time-bound. And I think that if you're going to say that, then you have to do the same thing with theology. I mean, people have done this. People have done this with Reformed theology and say, look, the only reason you can have these certain views of justification is because of certain legal theories that were popular at the time, or it arose out of certain ideas of law that allow you to make these certain distinctions that were really not thought of prior, even down to the first century. People have made this claim before to say that actually our own theology is contingent upon something outside of theology. People have done this before. I mean, you could even you could go as far as say as well, certain aspects of our theology were developed under Aristotelian metaphysics. And that was time-bound too, because there was the late 16th century rise of, the return of Aristotelianism, and then you have it in the early 17th century, and then you get Descartes, and then you get Pufendorf, and then you get Locke, and you get others, Hobbes, and then later on Kant, and that's just destroyed Aristotelian metaphysics. And so all these things that somehow bound our theology together are eliminated, all developed under an era of rising Aristotelian thought. You could do the same thing there. So this is not actually, I'm saying that if you want to go that direction, you can easily go that direction in theology, so I recommend you not go that direction. It would instead be a project of making good cases given the contingency of the politics and changing things as a binding present believers. Binding on or prudent to adopt to present believers. Again, he's doing the confusion between principle and politics. And then it's Oliver O'Donovan. I won't go to that. I'll get people mad if I say what I want. In any case, I'm glad in this committee is established, and I hope they'll produce something to value the church. Kimmy will, as they say, do the reading and will likewise avoid any imprudent anathemas of positions within the pale of our confessional tradition. Okay. At the same time, I expect the committee will find much troubling about both the teaching and the conduct of those who advocate for Christian nationalism, and likewise find that among the Reformed there is widespread disagreement on these social and political doctrines, that it cuts against any claim of exclusivity or unity on them within the Reformed tradition. Well, good luck. Certainly you can quote Van Drunen doing biblical theology to disprove all the, numerous works of far more capable men writing things on politics and political theory. But anyway, yeah, there is actually disagreement on a lot of things. You can think of the disagreements between the Scottish Presbyterians and the English Presbyterians on church-state questions. You can have the question of Erastianism versus Presbyterianism. You can have questions, all sorts across the board. But you know what is pretty much unified? It's that civil government ought to promote true religion, and they ought to promote true religion within the best means possible afforded to them in the circumstances. That is just, if you think that's up for debate within the tradition, I don't know what to tell you. It's there. I mean, you can go to Roger Williams, that nut from the 17th century. You could go to several people within the last 30 years and hear them say that. But you're not going to find that from very many people prior to the 20th century. All right. So that's that. Is that the end of it? Yeah. Okay. Let's see. He's in Covenant College. All right. Good for him. So we got that. That's there. So to kind of recap of what I said, what do I expect from them? They're going to do kind of what Philip Bunn just said at the end there. You can affirm a wide variety of positions. You could be establishmentarian and be very proud of it. I'm an extreme Christian guy because I like establishmentarians. Oh, how are you going to get there, man? Got to wait on revival. We don't want to look like we are too hungry for power. We don't want to look like that. And so what are we going to do? Well, we're going to just wait on revival. Oh, okay. Grill, do what you want, watch the game. So anyway, that's what there's going to be. All these views are all going to affirm them, saying you can believe this and that. There's going to be talk about the confession as well. I think that there are people writing about the confession who take different opinions on it. So I don't know to what extent, I didn't talk about the confession, but I don't know to what extent they're actually going to give leeway in that, because it's kind of ambiguous. It does seem to say that you cannot suppress, dissenting brethren. So maybe that's the one thing you can't do, but they might say, well, you can affirm all these other things. Here's what all these different people said. And so, yeah, you actually can be an establishmentarian. Okay. I think that's what they're going to do with the confession as well. But of course, they're going to undercut the means, and that's that. The other thing is they're going to, the big thing they want to do is to destroy the anti-Semitism and the racism among what they call our Christian nationalists. And they're going to talk about that. But they've been talking about that forever. And by the way, well, as I said before, people can affirm all sorts of things that many people would consider anti-Semitic or racist, and yet people could still, in their good conscience, deny that they're anti-Semitic and racist. And in fact, people should do that because the terms themselves don't actually mean that much. They don't mean anything at all, in fact. They're just used as a rhetorical device to put you on the defensive and give and require that you performatively denounce, renounce, and do all sorts of things. So that's going to be ineffective. But at the very least, the PCA gets another opportunity to declare their virtue to the liberal elite who actually don't care. But anyway, they're going to do that, of course. Yeah, so that's what I think is going to happen with the report. In terms of like responses, when it comes out, I'll read it and perhaps I'll respond to it here. I don't expect there to be much substance to it that is worthy of extensive discussion, except perhaps failure to make proper distinctions. I do think they're going to start injecting theology into politics in a way that's ad hoc and in a way that would confirm certain social arrangements, and certainly to make sure that they would denounce ethno-nationalism without, mentioning Israel and Japan and Korea and those places, but just making sure that good Christians in America are good Christians, that is, good modern Americans, and affirm principled pluralism or multiculturalism or whatever other word they want to come up with to affirm that. They will use theology for that end. They will talk about the Imago Dei. They will bring these things up. They'll inject all the theology that they need and violate every other sort of principle and distinction they already affirm in order to accomplish that. That's what I expect. Now, if I'm wrong about all this stuff, I'll admit that I'm wrong. These are, again, just my predictions. I've been around a while. I've seen how these people think. I've witnessed it. These people try to compose a syllogism that is blatantly invalid. I've seen these people try to make arguments, and I just expect them not to be very precise. I expect them to do the same thing most people do in politics today and within the Christian world, which is to violate all their principles that they state and other places in order to get the social arrangements that they desire. All right. Well, thank you for listening. Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully it'll just say Christian nationalism is great and you should all be Christian nationalists, or you should adopt classical Protestant politics, but it probably won't. So anyway, have a good day. Bye-bye now.